Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Week 3 USFL show. I'm going to be your host today, Sean, PSU fans to Newsham. Joining me, per usual, is Alex, Fearmyturtle Hardin. Alex, how's it going?
Hey, doing well. Excited to jump into Week 3. Week 2 is pretty good. Feeling a little bit better about projections, our input. So, ready to get started.
Yeah, we'll do a quick recap on Week 2 with what we had. We talked about some terrible coaching. I think that was on absolute display on this weekend. There were some just terrible coaches that clearly have no idea what they're doing. Jeff Fisher, Kirby Wilson, two of the ones that popped to mind the most. They look just terrible, and their teams just don't look good with what they're planning on doing. What's your thoughts on the coaching so far?
Yeah, I mean, we knew it was kind of going to be rough. At least with Kirby Wilson, we saw them kind of switch it up a bit and pass more. So that team's a little bit more interesting maybe than we thought they were going to be this season. But obviously, coaching is not great. However, I think Week 2 is a little better than Week 1 in the sense that you saw some more downfield passes. The offenses open up a little bit more, but then you still have Jeff Fisher like establishing the run quite aggressively still. But it's going to be an interesting league. I don't know like longer term like this is going to be able to compete with the XFL or all the levels pretty low, but we do see some people kind of jumping out. Jonathan Adams is one that jumped to mind last week. He looks like the best wide receiver in the league after after one game for him, basically. So we'll see some interesting things like that pop up as we go through the season.
For sure. Yeah. And then in terms of like players, I think we saw the teams that we said would passed. We said Brian Scott was the clear best quarterback. He ended up being the clear best quarterback. They threw the ball a substantial amount. Looking at the running backs, the running backs didn't really come in last week. The guys that we thought were good maybe got to work but didn't produce. Although some of the people we talked about as being good, decent GPP plays, like Jordan Ellis, like he had the most volume of any running back on the ground, but he wasn't involved in the pass game, which we'll talk about. And then at receiver, again, we talked about like a guy like Jordan Sewell running down the sidelines, and he's 6'6". Well, he got like 10 targets. Wasn't the most productive with those 10 targets, but if you're giving someone in a pass-happy offense 10 targets, they're always going to be viable. And also, did you notice that Bailey Gator and Trey Walker are on the same team? We just need a little Nick Starkel in there. We just have San Jose State set up.
We have Josh Love, also San Jose State. So
we do.
He beat out. It looks like he's beat out Kyle Lauletta as the starting quarterback. He played every snap last week, so the San Jose State Spartans connection is alive and well. But yeah.
So we're going to start off. We're going to go position by position, and then we're going to talk a little bit about game theory as we go and how we think about setting up the lineup. So, like starting at quarterback, we saw a lot of the same. There were certain quarterbacks that were incredibly productive. Then there were certain quarterbacks that were not. We saw a lot of splits that were similar, and then we also saw some splits sort of work themselves out a little bit. So stuff that I noticed is Brian Scott, to me, still the clear quarterback one in terms of like lineup construction and optimal lineups. They're just going to pass the ball. He's the one guy that I can bank on is going to at least get an opportunity to succeed. And then Jamar Smith looked really good with Magoo out. I would assume he has that role locked up a bit now. Really interesting thing was Tuamu got benched last week for Brady White. We're expecting that he is going to get his role back this week, but make sure you guys stay tuned. Also, again, to note, we're recording this on Wednesday morning or Wednesday early afternoon. So you guys got to make sure you are keeping up with the inactives as we get them. The reason we're doing it earlier in the week is we get the inactive news so late in the week as it is that it would make the show not really worthwhile if we did it at that time. So we're trying to do it and give you guys some possible outcomes of things and then also look through things. But as you see here, like for me, someone we talked about last week, I'll be interested to hear your thoughts. Luis Perez is a no play in any format for me. He's just giving up way too many snaps to DeAndre Johnson, who I do think is a GPP option due to his volume in the run game and enough passing game that it's at least viable. But for me, Perez is just not going to produce enough with losing about a significant amount of his snaps, because if I look at him in last week, like Perez played 63% of the snaps. If you don't have rushing upside and you're a quarterback only playing 63% of the snaps, you're just not going to get there. So what's your thoughts on Perez and the quarterbacks overall?
Yeah, it's really rough. They were like rotating like every other play in some drives. Like it's just a pretty weird rotation going on there. And Perez is definitely a clear stay away. And like you said, I would consider DeAndre and GPP. I mean, it's tough to see him. he would really need to break off like a really long touchdown run to challenge being the optimal quarterback. And we saw some of the quarterbacks like Scott and Sloter approach and in Scott's case exceed 30 DK points. It's tough to do that if you're only playing half the snaps like DeAndre Johnson. So it might even be a situation where I'm just exiting out both the quarterbacks even in a 150 pool. Houston is interesting because I think they want to play Kenji Bahar more, but he got hurt. I think he would have seen much more snaps than he actually saw last week. Clayton Thorson's looked really rough so far. So that's a pretty volatile situation. Jordan Ta'amu, like, I think he's going to be the starter, but I think they are going to rotate Brady White in occasionally. Like we said at the beginning of the season, like if Ta'amu is a great fantasy quarterback if they're running the offense around his skill set, and they're not really doing that. Like, he's not running a ton. He's not a great pocket passer. So I think he's definitely a bit overpriced on the slate, especially considering that we'll probably see some Brady White. And the team just doesn't look as good as we kind of expected them to be. But the top tier to me is really the Brian Scott, Jamar Smith, Kyle Sloter tier. That's a pretty much clear tier 1 for me. And then tier 2 is probably like the Shea Patterson, Ta'amu, Josh Love. And then that's probably the only 6 guys I'm going to be considering this week at the quarterback position. Up top, I think Jamar Smith's interesting because he's a bit cheaper and he's the clearest like stack partners. Last week, there was a lot of injuries on Philadelphia, so we could clearly pair receivers with Brian Scott. However, we really need the injury reports for Philadelphia to kind of decipher what's going to be going on with the pass catchers. So as you'll see now, and we'll get to it in receivers, like you'll see like Sewell pretty high, but that's all subject to change based on the injury report. And we haven't even got the initial practice report yet for those games. Probably tomorrow see the initial practice report for the Sunday games, which Philadelphia is on. So it'll be interesting to see there. But in terms of quarterback, Brian Scott's probably number 1 overall. He'll probably be my cash game quarterback. Then we got some pretty solid GPP options beyond that.
Yeah, and I mean, looking at quarterbacks a bit more too, like for me, Scott's the clear cash game play. Like I talked about, he is the guy that's going to get opportunities to succeed, which is more than I can say about every other quarterback in the league. For me, I would be crossing off in terms of any runs. I'd be crossing off really any of the teams that are really splitting because I just don't think that they can produce, with the exception of DeAndre Johnson. I disagree a little bit. I think that if he's going to get 10 to 15 carries on the ground, that's enough to make him worthwhile as an option, because I do think that if he's getting 10 to 15 on the ground, he has 100 on the ground and a touchdown upside, which I do think can play on certain weeks, like especially like week 1, no quarterback got to a point where 20 points wouldn't have played. So I would still use him. For me, like I would be not really considering Thorson with Bahar there. I wouldn't be considering Luis Perez. I think that Ta'amu is a bit risky with Brady White as well. I think you nailed it on the head that Brian Scott, clear 1. For me, Jamar Smith, clear 2. And then it's like Sloter, Patterson, Love. And I don't really even like Love. His price point's just good. But something to note is, and I think I'll see what you think on this. I don't think we're going to see efficient pricing really all season, because every week with how shallow the rosters are, it seems like there's going to be a new value piece that pops in which we're going to talk about when we get to other positions. Like, I think quarterback is not the position you get different at. I think that's just not where you're going to differentiate on the year. I think you're going to differentiate elsewhere. But do you think we're going to see like an efficient pricing scale where there aren't just like 4K guys that are really good and really solid options?
No, I mean, we're week 3 into this, and like the price adjustments have been very minimal, like even guys who have smashed. So to your point, like Josh Love is interesting, and he's like 3K cheaper than Brian Scott, but like it doesn't like help you get other pieces in your lineup really, because there's plenty of like really good 3 and 4K guys at receiver. So that makes it tough with like the cheaper stacks like a Josh Love. But like if pricing was really tight, Josh Love would be someone I'd probably be pretty interested in tournaments and making stacks there and then building out some studs around them. But it's just not necessary, like you said. I think GPPs are going to be 1 each week at the wide receiver position. I'm kind of seeing that so far.
Yeah, we'll talk about receivers a bit when we get there, because I know that you actually like sort of track some of the ownership percentages on some of them. So we'll talk about some ownership percentages on some of the receivers when we get there. But yeah, I think quarterback's going to be straightforward for the year. I think that's where it is. All right, running back. I'm going to go quick game by game sort of like what the situation was, and then we'll talk a bit about projections this week and what we're thinking. So looking at Michigan, Reggie Corbin was active last week, and they ran 3 running backs, which effectively will kill all of them. Corbin was actually the leading snap count. He actually had, or I'm sorry, Cameron Scarlett was the leading snap count guy, but again, they had 9, 8, and 7 carries. So it really was something that hurt both of them. Looking at Tampa Bay, BJ Emmons and Juwan Washington, again, split snaps. It was pretty much right down the middle this week. We talked about Emmons last week being a little bit more of a workhorse, and he still had a 2-to-1 carry volume similar to week 1, but the snap count again was pretty evened out there for Tampa Bay. Philadelphia, we saw Fat Colburn was active but didn't play. He did not play a snap despite being active in that game. Paul Terry came in, and Paul Terry actually played the most snaps at running back.
Yeah, Holland tweaked his groin or something on a kick return. Yeah.
There you go. So Holland tweaked his groin, led to Terry being the only back there. So we're going to have to look as we get info on the week in that situation. But it was clear that Colburn was active, and that we thought that you can talk about this a little bit too when we're done. But we thought if anyone was active, they were going to be playing. We didn't think they would activate someone and not really use him. But it was pretty clear that they activated Colburn and did not play him, and there was no intention.
The challenge there was that Colburn was actually listed as probable. Like if he was like limited and then still on the active roster, but like I guess you have to kind of take it that Terry was a third running back that was activated for this game that wasn't activated the previous game. So maybe they just didn't have, maybe they were just forced to have a dead roster spot anyway. So they had Coburn as an emergency back or something. So
yeah. And I think what we're learning is that if there are 3 active backs, you probably just steer clear of that team, because it just seemed like if there was 3 active backs that were getting utilized, or there was something up with the situation. All right, carrying on, New Jersey, you had Trey Williams. He to me looks like the clear RB1 in terms of volume in the league. He actually was out carried last week by Darius Victor, but the snap counts have been 2-to-1 in his favor, and his pass game usage is much better than that of Victor, who's not being used in the pass game much at all. So I think that he's probably RB1 for me. Going to Houston, we had Mark Thompson was listed last week as questionable, but he ended up playing, and he doubled up the snap count from Dalen Dawkins, and he actually doubled up the rushing volume as well. And there was no pass game usage between the two of them, which I will say, no pass game usage from the running backs in this league is concerning to me, because the running backs that are getting pass game usage are getting 4 or 5 targets. That's like a free 5 to 6 points that they're starting ahead of anyone else. So I really like it from that perspective. Going to Birmingham, we had CJ Maribel and Tony Brooks James split again. Snap count was dead even, but Maribel had a 2-to-1 carry volume advantage over Brooks James. For Pittsburgh, we talked about Pittsburgh the week before. These running backs are not talented. Garrett Groshek and Madre London are not talented, but the volume's there. Week 1, they had 30 carries between the two of them. Week 2, they had 28 between the two of them. Groshek is at 16 and 18 carries between the last 2 games. He did actually have a target this week as well, which was a positive for him. And then last but not least is the New Orleans team. Jordan Ellis got absolutely fed the ball on the ground. He had 21 carries last week, but it's still very clear that TJ Logan is the pass game running back. He had 5 targets to that of Ellis's 1. So I still think that's a very close matchup. So what overall is your thoughts on the running back situation from what you saw last week?
Yeah, I mean, just looking forward to this week. I think the New Orleans guys are in a great spot. Like Birmingham's gotten absolutely destroyed on the ground through 2 games. They've allowed like 180 yards on the ground per game through 2 games. And like Jordan Ellis has 19 and 21 carries in his 2 games. Like they're going to feed him. Obviously, Logan's going to get his share of carries and the pass work. So I think they're both like elite plays this week. And I don't think it's crazy to play them both in the same lineup either. I would max to Ellis, Logan, and Sloter just to minimize like your New Orleans exposure a bit. Like
I would remove Sloter and Ellis, because Ellis is getting no pass game volume, I think. So I wouldn't compare the two.
So yeah, I wouldn't pair Ellis and Sloter, but I'd be fine running Sloter and Logan or Ellis and Logan. Just not, yeah. Yeah, I think so. We're on the same page there. It's hard to see a situation where Ellis fails really, and like his price he's really cheap. So that's going to be interesting to how to handle New Orleans running backs. And it might actually push down Sloter's ownership if people are playing both of the New Orleans running backs a lot. So definitely keep an eye on that. I do like Trey Williams again this week. He hasn't necessarily gotten there yet, but the volume has been great, both on the ground and through the air. So he's a really safe play. Emmons, you see when Tampa Bay gets down big, like it's not a great game script for him. Although I think he has a good chance to bounce back this week. I think he's still in the top tier conversation. And it was interesting to me, like my big takeaway running back last week was that like Groshek, Thompson, and Maribel all kind of separated from their running back competition within their team. So it is concerning, and especially for Thompson if you're not getting any pass game work. But he's certainly one of the few guys in the league I could see go for 101 on the ground, and that gets you there.
Yeah, I would like. What's your thoughts on the Philly running back situation? I would really like it if we could play one due to the pass game usage.
Yeah, I mean, it's really going to come down to the injury report stuff. Like, if all three are active and expected to play, it's going to be tough to play any of them because I think they are going to rotate a lot. And that definitely pushes them into more like GPP only territory. But if one of them is inactive and it's just a clear two-headed backfield, I think both of those guys would be in play. It could be a situation where Holland's injury is more severe and like he's out this week and it's Terry and Colburn like that. I think both of them are in play. Like they're all really cheap.
Yeah, if you got word that either Colburn was out or Holland was out, would you be rotating to the one that is active or would you just jam in Terry? I think for me, I would just go straight to Terry.
Yeah, probably. And I don't think you have to play any of them just because the other running back options are so strong. And I am going to be playing probably Brian Scott in cash. Like if you need the salary, you could certainly play Terry and flex, but I think would probably use some of the more expensive pass catchers in that lineup construction. But for tournaments, there's just a lot of options and ways to approach Philadelphia. And it's going to be fully dependent on the reports we get. We may not get some like the final status for that game until maybe like even Friday or Saturday morning. So definitely something to pay attention to.
Yeah, I would doubt we get it until Saturday. But yeah, like what we talked about with quarterback and how price points just don't matter. The two of the three guys that we think are the best running backs options are 5,400 and 5,600. And we think they are better than guys that are 9K as well. So like I think it's definitely something that you're going to have no problem filling out the running backs. For me, I think, again, like we talked about, Garrett Groshek is a great GPP play to me. The volume's there. At some point, if you're getting 20 carries, you're going to have a productive game where you put up 20-plus points. It's going to happen. You're getting too much volume for it not to happen at some point. So I think that's definitely something to notice. I do still think that, like, even Madre London's a good GPP play. He's going to get some volume. As well. And then someone else I thought was solid was Mark Thompson. We saw Thompson was banged up going into the week, but then we saw him separate significantly from Dalen Dawkins on the weekend. So like you see them just a little bit below those top end guys, but I definitely think they're good GPP plays. Is there anyone else that sort of stands out to you at all for there?
Yeah, I mean, to that point, like as we get more comfortable and more confident in our inputs and stuff, ownership's going to concentrate on one side of the pairing. So it's a situation where like maybe they were a bad GPP play last week at ownership, but someone like a Scarlett or Juwan Washington or even a Mark Thompson comes in like sub 10% here, they become really interesting for a larger field because the one takeaway through 2 weeks I've seen is that ownership concentrates really hard at every position, even in the large field tournament. So you're going to have to look at ways to go about it differently and looking at some of these second running backs on the team, I think it's a pretty interesting approach. Like even someone like Reggie Corbin from Michigan, they're a three-headed backfield. I wouldn't consider any of them for cash, but Corbin actually looked pretty good last week. He looks like he had some juice. So like, I don't think it's crazy to play someone like him in tournaments. And like, I could see him score 15, 20 fantasy points at sub 5% ownership. So there's just a lot of ways to go about it.
Yeah, I agree. I think this isn't like the NFL. I mean, I guess it sort of is, but like every situation is split significantly. There's not a full workhorse out there. Every single situation, even the best situations, are full on split. So I think that you can definitely play one of the backup running backs and definitely get different. Like looking through all these guys like Juwan Washington. They were a lot more even last week with Trey Williams, in that situation with BJ Emmons. It was a lot more close cut. If they end up trailing the whole game, Juwan Washington gets used quite a bit more than BJ Emmons. He could have a really strong game. So
yeah,
I definitely think that in terms of the running backs. All right, moving over to receivers. We said last week that we thought Victor Bolton was wide receiver 1. He had the most targets of anyone. He really just had very low ADOT on those. I think he had 10 catches for like 39 yards or something, super small. But we saw some guys that we talked up as deep threats step up and had good games. We saw Jordan Sewell have a solid game. We saw Osiris Mitchell. We saw Bailey Gaither had a really solid game. I know you really like what you saw out of Jonathan Adams. So at receiver, I view receiver. Here's the thing with receiver. Quarterback, there was one quarterback that I think is an optimal option. Running back, I think there's a group of 3 to 5 running backs that you can play. Receivers really open. I think you can make a case for a lot of different receiver options. So why don't you talk about the receivers a little bit?
Yeah, so Jordan Sewell right now is our top projected. That definitely is subject to change. Say if like Devin Gray is a full participant in practice and Chris Rowland's a full participant, like that share is going to have to get spread out a bit more. I do think Victor Bolton has the best floor of any receiver. However, when you're running like all of your catches are like at the line of scrimmage, it's hard to break a slate. He's eventually going to score a touchdown, but I think his teammate Osiris Mitchell has a bit more upside for like that multiple touchdown game and getting there even on less volume. So he's pretty interesting. I think he's even like cash viable as well. Lance Lenore from Michigan, like he's their clear one. Like his target share is massive. I think it's been over 30% each of the first 2 weeks. I think he had like 176 air yards last week. Granted, it was Shea Patterson throwing him the ball, so take that for what you will in terms of like how viable some of those passes that led to the air yards were in terms of actually getting them completed. But he's definitely someone who's going to get chances to produce. Maurice Alexander with the injuries in Philadelphia, he was one of the best plays last week. I think he scored like 28 DK points, got a lot of volume, played almost every snap. That's another thing. Like if it's going to be fully dependent on the injury situation with his teammates. So that's another projection that could definitely come down. The New Orleans guys are interesting in that Adams looked like kind of one of the more physical freaks of this league, like just going up and one-handing balls over DBs. Like he was a really productive wide receiver at Arkansas State, and I think he has like an NFL type body. He could definitely do well in this league. And Johnny Dixon's more of a slot receiver. He was still really involved. I guess you see like Adams is 3.8. You can play him in cash if you want it. Like, so it's going to be pretty close to a pick 'em this week, but someone like Victor Bolton, definitely the highest floor to me, but there's a handful of others that are certainly cash viable.
Yeah, I agree on the Bolton floor. I'll give you guys a quick rundown on team by team. So Michigan, there was not tons of volume outside of Lance Lenore. Like Alex said, that it was very clear that Lance Lenore was going to be the guy getting the targets. Him and Devin Ross played the most snaps. Ross was because probably Jeff Badette was out injured in that game. Moving to Tampa Bay, we had a couple guys. We had Jordan Lastly get 92% snap count. The one guy that I found interesting was John Franklin. John Franklin had a 90% snap count. He had 3 targets, but he also had 4 carries. So I think that makes
they're running Wildcat for him, which is interesting because like you're not running like Tamu, but you're going to run John Franklin. So that was interesting.
So it's very interesting. I think that makes Franklin viable. To me, clear best team in the league, again, that we've talked about in terms of what to expect from them is Philly. So Philly runs a very shallow wide receiver pool, which is what you want to see. As Alex said, a lot of it's based on injuries, but even the week before, they ran a very tight wide receiver pool. But this week, we saw Jordan Sewell run 100% of snaps. He ran 95% in week 1, and he had 10 targets this week. Great play. He's a guy that's going to put up big games. And then also, like, they had DeAndre Overton, Maurice Alexander, and Bug Howard all ran 80% of the snaps, and they had 10, 4, 9, and 5 targets. So all of them were receiving targets, and it was condensed to them pretty much because not really much else played. Looking at New Jersey, again, they're going to have the quarterback situation. If they're ahead, DeAndre Johnson's going to play. We saw Randy Satterfield. We talked about him last week that we didn't think he was that good of a play. Proved to be pretty accurate. He only saw 2 targets last week. And they really didn't have anyone that really received volume. So I think from them.
Yeah, I would say Darius Shepard. He was someone who was limited week 1. He came in. To me, it looks pretty clearly like he's going to be their wide receiver 1 in terms of targets. Like they just didn't have many attempts, but I think he's going to be like their highest floor type receiver.
Definitely. And then on Houston, we had Isaiah Zuber. I talked about him. I think I marked him as a GPP play. He had 7 targets. He's a guy that's going to be running deep down the sideline, and he's a great GPP play again this week, I think. We also saw Tyler Simmons had 10 targets for the Houston team. He was very ineffective, though, with his 10 targets. But, again, that's another great option there. Birmingham, we have a few people that really got a heavy snap count and heavy target volume. Victor Bolton, we talked about. He had 12 targets, played almost every snap. Similar with Osiris Mitchell, played only 80%. He was down from 96 in the first weekend, but he still had 7 targets. And then I know you talked about Marlon Williams and his size, but he actually caught a bomb this week, which you were pretty shocked to see.
Yeah. So Marlon Williams is a guy that I'm going to play based on ownership every week. So week 1, he was highly owned. Didn't want that much of him, played under. Week 2, he's someone that was off the radar. He had 5 targets, no catches, off the radar. Played a lot of him. He catches a bomb. This week, if he's going to come in with any kind of ownership, he's someone I'll happily fade completely, just because I don't think his target volume is going to be that ridiculous. And like he got there on 1 catch last week. I don't know. He looked a little bit slimmer running down the field on that 80-yard touchdown. So maybe
another week of practice.
Another week of practice knocked it off. All that extra weight off.
Moving to Pittsburgh. So here's my thing with Pittsburgh. Kirby Wilson is really bad. He's a complete moron. They don't want to throw the ball. If they are ahead, they're going to run the ball. Last week, they were really helped by the game script, and we saw a lot of targets to that of Gaither, Hardaway, Trey Walker. I'm not sure those targets are going to be there fully if they are able to actually lead a game or play in like a neutral script. I think we'll see a lot less passing there. So that's just something there.
And this game's interesting because Michigan is the highest run rate who they're playing. So this could turn into a game where they just both plow into each other for the entire game. And like it's like a 6-3 game.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was anticipating. I'm expecting that game to be a really slodge, like gross game where both teams just pound the ball into the back of the line. And
it has the same total as Tampa Bay Houston, though, which is
it does, but I think that the Vegas totals are going to be somewhat inefficient to start the season.
Yeah.
But I'm not, like I said, I think Kirby Wilson's probably the most inept coach in the league. He's just, it might be Jeff Fisher. I don't know. Jeff Fisher's terrible too. And then last but not least, New Orleans. They spread out the receivers a lot. Johnny Dixon got a good target volume, as did Adams. I think Adams for me is one of the best value options on the league. Like Alex said, to me, if I look through the list of players at every position, he's the most NFL caliber player in the skill positions that we look at for DFS purposes. His body to me and what I've seen from him at Arkansas State looks like a guy that could play in the NFL. Therefore, makes me think he can play well in the USFL too. And his snap count's been good. His target volume was really solid last week at 3,800. I think you could definitely do worse than that. So any other sort of thoughts at receiver? I think the main thing for me is Philadelphia is the clear best team. If you get a situation where you know who the receivers are going to be due to who's injured, like if we see the same receiving core as last week, Maurice Alexander, Bug Howard, and DeAndre Overton are all in the 4K range. That just doesn't make sense to me. I do think Sewell's probably the best option, but like if Maurice Alexander's 4,500 after what he produced, I think it could definitely be replicated.
Yeah, I totally agree. Last thought, probably my favorite GPP wide receiver, or one of them, is Jordan Lasley. You touched on him for a second. Looking at some like visualizations of like ADOT versus target share, like he's a guy who has a high target share and a high ADOT. So I think it's just a matter of time before he has a pretty big game. Quarterback play is kind of suspect there in terms of Tomu throwing him the ball down the field, but I think Lasley will be pretty moderately owned, and he has a lot of upside for his price.
Definitely. All right, moving to the defenses, which we'll talk about quickly. Again, I still think you should be spreading out your defense. I think that spreading it makes no sense. There's going to be lots of errors in this league, so you want to be able to get the chances to get that nut defense. In terms of like cash, like I know we talked about Brian Scott being the QB1, but the Philly team is going to throw the ball a lot. The most likely chance of interactions from the defense is when a team throws a lot. So, like, despite us thinking that he is QB1, I still think that there's going to be quite a few opportunities for New Jersey to make defensive plays because of the fact they're going to pass significantly. I assume you think the same thing in terms of defenses.
Yeah, so you see they're a dog here. I mean, they're the second highest projected defense, and that's just because they're going to get that many more opportunities for sacks and interceptions. New Orleans is the number 1 defense. They have 10 sacks through 2 weeks, so their sack rate's pretty enormous relative to the rest of the league. That's not going to hold necessarily. I think it's a bit of an outlier. However, I do think they're in a pretty good spot. They should be playing from ahead, meaning Birmingham will have to drop back a lot. Plenty of opportunities for interceptions and sacks there. So I think for me, the Breakers are clear number 1. But like Sean said, if that's going to be the team where ownership kind of condenses around and they're like 25%, like you probably should be going under the field in large field tournaments. And it seems like each week there has been a defense that has ownership has condensed in like the mid to upper 20s. So definitely spread it around a defense for sure.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Is there any other sort of overview thoughts that you have? To me, the differentials that you're going to find yourself doing, which we've talked about, sort of spread your defenses. There's going to be lower owned defenses that produce. And then I think that we're looking at receivers really where you're going to differentiate. We saw Maurice Alexander at, I believe, like 3% last week. We're going to see lots of receivers that can have really strong games, be low owned. And I definitely think running backs are also a position to really get differential at.
Yeah, for sure. I think all that definitely makes sense. Should be a good week. A lot of options. I do have a couple of prize picks if you play there. So Jordan Ellis, the line there is 40.5 rushing yards. We have him projected for like 82. So that line is legitimately 100% off. So that's as close to a free square I think you're going to get all season in terms of that. BJ Emmons over 40.5 rush yards is another good one. There's just a good, check out the Discord, the Usfl Discord channel. I posted a few in there the other day. Just a good opportunity, get a few in early in the week while the lines are soft, because they're just posting some pretty generic lines for positions.
Definitely. Yeah, there's definitely, like Alex said, he posted some yesterday. There were some 100% off. It's quite a bit off. So there's definitely some things to take a look at. As we said, use the USFL channel in Discord. Alex will be in there posting some people that are in, that are out, possible adjustments. The projections will be updated all week. When will the first run of player ownership be out, Alex?
It's going to be either Thursday or Friday. Hopefully we get some injury reports for all the teams first, and then we'll start working on projected ownership. Tags will be up then as well. This slate doesn't start till Saturday. I know last week we started Friday, so we have an extra day to prepare. Get a nice Saturday, Sunday 8 p.m. nightcap. So a nice little end game for the slate. So looking forward to it. We'll have everything up by Friday. Yep.
Definitely. All right, everyone. That's going to call it for us this week. We'll be back again next week. Good luck to you all this weekend. For Alex, I am Sean. Good luck, everyone. We'll see you later.